This is Pat O'Connell. We're going to be convening our regional market participation informational workshop soon, but there's a big traffic backup on I-25. So there's a lot of folks who are expecting that aren't here yet. So if you could hang with us, we'll probably start about 10-15 minutes late. Thank you. Bye. Yeah, just a reminder for anybody who might be watching online that we've holding off on starting the workshop today because there's a large traffic backup on the freeway and there's a few folks who are planning to be here in person that are on their way. So we're trying to give them a chance to get here. So anyway, I will convene this meeting at 12:45 Mountain Time. Good afternoon. This is Pat O'Connell. I'm calling to order a special open meeting of the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission. This is the latest in a series of workshops on regional market participation, informational workshop. We have quite a few guests here and looking forward to presentations from them and a good conversation. For those of you who've been watching online, thank you for your patience. We also have a large traffic situation on I-25 leading up to Santa Fe. So not everybody that was planning to be here is here yet, but I think they're on their way. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll call the roll. Commissioner Aguilera.
Present.
Commissioner Ellison.
Present.
And Commissioner O'Connell is here. We have a agenda that we posted for this workshop. Commissioners, do you have any changes you'd like to make to the agenda before we proceed?
No, thank you. None, thank you.
Okay, so we'll proceed with the agenda as posted. Next on the agenda is public comment. I don't know if we had anybody register online to provide public comment leading into this meeting, but I'll go ahead and first ask if there's somebody in the room who's here that would like to give a comment before we get started. So seeing none, Mr. Rodriguez, if you're out there, do we have anyone registered for public comment online?
Mr. Chair, we do not have anyone registered.
Okay, seeing none, then I'm going to turn this workshop over to Commissioner Aguilera, who's been designing and coordinating these workshops, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Patrick, do you mind just saying a quick hello just to make sure that we can hear the audio?
Can you hear me, Commissioner?
Almost not. I could barely hear it.
So there was a noise.
Okay, let me just wait a little bit just to make sure that we can hear whether there is public comment or not online.
Commissioner, can you hear me?
Very faintly.
There is no public comment online.
Okay, thank you.
A little bit.
Okay, thank you. Oh, now I can hear myself loudly. Okay, well, first I want to thank SPP and CAISO for coming on relatively short notice. And very grateful that you've made it and agreed to present your day-ahead market options and other offerings that you have. So I had initially planned for El Paso Electric and PNM to present on the transfer capability that exists between into either market, and especially with respect to the transmission rights that they have and other entities could have to either option. And they said that they would be definitely willing to present if and when asked to do that, but that they have a study being commissioned on that exact topic. It'll be completed in July, and so they suggested that it'd be better to wait, and I agree. So, I asked CAISO and SPP if they would be willing to come, and they both agreed. So thank you very much. And so as to that discussion about the transfer capability, I think that it would be a good idea to have a discussion on that topic in August. And so with that being said, I wanted to revisit the purpose of this workshop series as I see it. Unlike Nevada and Colorado, New Mexico doesn't require utilities to join an RTO or to join any day-ahead market. And so my goal is to develop a guidance document or white paper that can help determine what factors El Paso Electric and PNM and any other utilities in New Mexico should consider when deciding which or whether day-ahead market to join. And so we issued a bench request order that brought a lot of, it generated a lot of really good ideas from stakeholders, and which was the other goal of this workshop, is to engage the stakeholders so that it's transparent to the utilities what stakeholders are looking for. So that being said, I also welcome a draft guidance document that any entity would like to suggest for the commission's consideration. And such guidance could be inserted into the record in this docket 23-00268. So again, just, very grateful that SPP and CAISO are here. I think we could, get down to business, and the agenda has CAISO presenting first. So if that still works, if you would please take the mics up here. Thank you. And actually, while I'm saying that, I'm actually going to turn it over. I just want to check to see if the other commissioners have anything that they would like to say.
Well, I just want to echo your appreciation for both Cal ISO and SPP being here. These workshops have proven to be pretty valuable resources, I think, not just for us as a commission trying to understand these issues better. And like we've said, New Mexico, I think, has a interesting role to play in definitely in the West and however these markets play out. So it's a big decision for our state. So, we're taking it seriously, and I think it's fabulous that you're here helping us with that. So thank you, and looking forward to the discussion.
Really appreciate your efforts, Commissioner Aguilera, in organizing these workshops, which are very valuable. Appreciate the participation from all parties. As you all know, the cost of bulk power is a pass through to the end consumer. Day-ahead markets offer the promise of reducing that power cost, and different markets could potentially have different levels of savings. And so in my view, it's something that the commission should be interested in, and that we are following. So thank you very much.
Yeah, there we go. Just testing, sounds okay? Okay. Well, thank you very much for having us present today. I know it's an important topic. It's a topic being discussed around the West, and we at the ISO look forward to discussion. And if we don't answer all your questions today, or we're not able to, we will certainly get back to you with answers. So let me just jump into the material. So I'll go through, probably take about 45 minutes. We'll leave some time for questions and answers. I'll discuss a little bit about the existing Western Energy Imbalance Market, the value it's proven to provide. I'll get into the extended day-ahead market, some of the specific elements, and then I will talk a little bit about governance and maybe some of the connectivity matters. And so hopefully I will cover everything that you want today. Next. So the Western Energy Imbalance Market has proven to provide a great deal of value to the West. It's grown from just California ISO and Pacific Core to now being in all 11 Western states, covering 80% of the West, and even going into Canada. It allows the value of the energy balance market is to allows us to, or entities to, one, maintain the autonomy. as a balancing area. So they're not joining an RTO. They're maintaining their autonomy. Everything's locally controlled, but they're able to share in the value and have their imbalances met by the most economic resource. And they're able to offer their resources, surplus capacity, to the market and get value for that capacity. We've quantified the benefits of the EIM, and one of the benefits that we've quantified is also the value of avoiding curtailment of renewable resources. And then just to be clear, the energy imbalance market was not developed solely for renewable resources. It was recognizing that the system was changing and people knew that they needed to figure out better ways intra-hour to manage those imbalances. But one of the side benefits of that was that as we get more and more solar, especially in California, there's going to be surplus energy at times. And what we found was that it's very effective of sharing that surplus energy and having an outlet for it. And in doing so, we could be displacing other resources across the West. Some of them may be emitting resources. So what we quantify, in addition to the monetary economic benefit, is the environmental benefit of displacing emitting resources using that surplus energy that would otherwise potentially be curtailed, not be used. And that's that almost 1 million metric tons of avoided curtailment number in terms of carbon reduction since 2014. If you go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Perfect. This is the more traditional benefits that we've quantified. We put out a quarterly report that we calculate the benefits, that we measure those benefits based on effectively both the benefit to load, consumers effectively being able to access more economic supply than what they otherwise would have served that demand with on their own intra-hour. And then the other side of the equation is if you have surplus supply, being able to access the marketplace and be able to get value for that energy in other parts of the market. And again, intra-hour that you otherwise would not have been able to. It started off relatively moderate, but as the footprint grew, we now accumulated since 2014, $5.5 billion of economic benefits through that quantification that I just described. Of that, almost $100 million of benefit for Public Service Company of New Mexico, PNM, since 2021, and El Paso Electric, just about 20 million since their joining in 2023. And I don't have the graph, but you can see the progression. The more entities who join, the more transmission that is available for optimized use, the more the economic benefits grew. Next slide, please. So I'm transitioning to the extended day ahead market, and it was shortly after 2014 when the energy imbalance market started and we started quantifying those benefits. It wasn't shortly thereafter that the question started to be asked, well, is there more? Is there anything more we can do to unlock the value, reliability, economic, environmental benefits of what we see is happening and you can demonstrate in the energy imbalance market? And the natural progression was, well, yeah, we can look at actually doing optimized setting up the day ahead. We had already been doing that in the California ISO footprint, and the discussion started shortly after 2014. Is that how can we extend the benefits into the day ahead market? There was various discussions along the way. They kind of started off in 2018. They took a hiatus, but they really restarted in 2022. And we started by kicking off really a new concept for us, and that was working groups. The working groups enabled stakeholders from across the industry to engage in the discussion. We did not come in with a proposal. This is how we do it. This is the policy. We wanted the working groups to actually dive into the design discussion and the details. And those went on for roughly about a year on various topics. And you can see here, 60 working group meetings over that time period. And then we progressed into more specific workshops where we started to dive in and write proposals, draft proposals, and engage the stakeholders and feedback in those proposals. At the end of the day, we had over 130 sets of written comments during that process, and it led to ultimately a proposal that we brought to the joint governing body, the EIM governing body, and the board, the ISO board, for approval, and then on to FERC for approval, which we have now gained approval from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission on the vast majority of the design. There's one element that I'll get into later with regards to access charge and how transmission recovery works. That is still pending on refiling at the commission at this point. Next slide, please. So this is just a high level overview of some of the key design elements of the extended day ahead market. Some of these we borrowed from the energy imbalance market. For example, the nature of voluntary participation. No one should feel obligated to participate in the extended day ahead market, just like in the EIM. Balancing areas are able to enable it for their area by joining. But they also have relatively ease of exit if they felt like it was not working for them. We have not had any exits from the Western Energy Imbalance market at this point. And the voluntary participation model seems to be enabling about 1 to 5 entities a year joining. And now we're getting to the point where most of the West is in the Western Energy Imbalance market. But that voluntary participation, the knowledge that you were not stuck with this, was an important feature that we extended into the day ahead market concept. Optimize use. What we're trying to do, just like in the energy imbalance market, but in the day ahead, because unlike the real-time market, where there's probably about 5% or so of the imbalances are served by real-time activity, the bulk of the activity is being set up day ahead or through bilateral transactions. That's why the day ahead market is so important. It's also where long start resources are being set up, and transmission utilization and optimization, it really has an opportunity to do its job of benefiting the system, to minimizing the cost to serve load. I mean, that's the objective, and that's the optimization objective. And how do we do that in the most effective and efficient way? We can't do that optimization unless we really have connectivity. And the connectivity is the transmission. And how that the principle that we tried to drive to was maximizing the transmission availability for optimized use in the day ahead time frame. And we put together several mechanisms that did that, while still recognizing that some transmission is under contracts, and those contracts have to be honored subject to the agreements. But we wanted to maximize and provide the most opportunity for that transmission to be made available. And I'll get into that a little bit more. Another important concept, just as it was in the real-time energy imbalance market, was these markets are not meant to be a place where you come in insufficient and you lean on your neighbor. The concept is you come in sufficient and you benefit by being able to share with your neighbor. And that's the same concept with the daily resource efficiency evaluation. Certainly how entities have sufficient capacity to meet that daily sufficiency test is a good question. And that gets into the resource adequacy question. But we've developed a mechanism that you don't have to be in a specific resource adequacy program. You could be under your own IRP. How you get resource adequate is up to that entity, but then you come to bring those resources to bear, and we test to make sure there's sufficiency at a balancing area level. And from there, you can get the benefits. But if you're not sufficient, we also have mechanisms to deal with that as well. And I'll get into those later. Uncertainty is a big issue these days, whether it be load uncertainty or supply uncertainty with variable resources, or weather uncertainty. So I bring this up because the understanding not just your forecasted needs, but the potential for needing additional dispatchable capacity is important. This is where the imbalance reserve component deals with that. So we're introducing a new product in parallel as we implement the extended day ahead market. And that new product is the imbalance reserve. It's different from operating reserve in the sense that it will be used on a regular basis when uncertainty materializes. Unlike operating reserve is there for that contingency event, sudden loss of a resource, sudden loss of transmission. Imbalance reserve is that flexibility, that dispatch capability that is available all the time in sufficient volume to deal with the regular uncertainty that's going on in the system. Procuring that day ahead helps you set up for the real time and ride through the uncertainties in the real time. And so that's why we tied and included the imbalance reserve mechanism product to the day ahead market. Since I mentioned the operating reserve and ancillary services, I should mention now that the first generation of the extended day ahead market will not be co-optimizing ancillary services and energy for the broad footprint. That is something we need to continue to look for. It's an opportunity, but there's some additional things that we need to consider to offer optimized ancillary services. But we can do imbalance reserve to cover that regular uncertainty. Another component, again, the West there's not one GHG policy in the West. But we still have to optimize and look for that opportunity to optimize across the West, respecting different states' objectives, policies. And so we did borrow effectively and extend the idea from the energy imbalance market, some of the mechanisms to optimize, but yet for those states that are in GHG cap and share aid regions or priced control regions, we can dispatch recognizing the cost of GHG. For those that are outside of those GHG regions, we can recognize the cost of transferring energy into the GHG region. But for the non-GHG regions, the prevailing view is that they don't want their energy priced and dispatch considering the GHG costs and implications. Now, there's always something in between. There's, for example, New Mexico, where it's a non-priced kind of GHG control mechanism, and Oregon's kind of similar. The question is, well, is there things that the market can do, not necessarily to optimize that, but to inform or provide transparency around, or maybe even control how much is being dispatched to serve that load in that non-priced region, but yet not incorporated it into the price itself. This is a very complicated topic. We could probably spend a whole day or multiple days talking about this. Let me just say at a high level, the GHG topic and how we came up with it tried to balance all those things out. It is not perfect. And that imperfection does lead to things like leakage. And we've come up with methodologies how to track and quantify that leakage so that we can also, at least in California, retire allowances to account for that. You don't get rid of those leakage effects unless you have one common GHG program across the region. There's no expectation that the market design is going to create that. But we look for the opportunity where we can harmonize the GHG different mechanisms across the West. All right. Next slide, please. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into three topics: transmission, resource efficiency, and GHG a little bit more. As I stated before, transmission and maximizing the transmission availability and the opportunity to optimize it is one objective. The other objective is to honor the rights and respect the rights for those customers that want to utilize their rights physically. We want to respect that and enable that. For those transmission customers who want to offer up their transmission capability, there's a mechanism to work with their transmission provider and doing that. It's important that the transmission providers remain engaged in this endeavor to try to maximize that transmission opportunity for the market, because we want to make sure that the rights are being respected pursuant to the contracts. There are different contracts, and we want to make sure that the transmission provider is engaged in that. At the end of the day, we put a lot of different mechanisms in place to bring those all together and allow for all those objectives to be met. Some of those we had to think about what were the implications for other things like the Western Resource Adequacy Program, because the Western Resource Adequacy Program is going to be relying on transmission that may be going across a non-RAP area or a non-Markets Plus area. And so through dialogue, through engagement with the Western Resource Adequacy Program, we believe we came up with a solution that we filed and that was approved that addresses any concerns about interoperability and allowing for RAP to be effective, utilizing those rights that they have, entities that rights that they have on their transmission, and respecting those rights, potentially all the way up through real time if their rights provide for that. And we did that. There's trade-offs. If you start carving out transmission, that may be inefficient. So we tried to create mechanisms that both provide incentive, try to minimize the amount of carving out, but if necessary, we can carve out, but also trying to provide incentive to maximize that transmission availability so that if the transmission is not used for their use, the transmission is still available for optimizing the flows across the system. And that's where the benefits come to the EDAM. Next slide, please. Resource efficiency. So as I stated, we do consider the resource efficiency evaluation as a mechanism to really bring together different RA, integrated resource programs. And I want to be clear, we do believe and encourage resource adequacy programs develop across the West. It's important. Resource adequacy is important in of itself. But we believe that there could be different resource adequacy programs or integrated resource planning programs that then bring and evaluate the capacity together on a daily basis coming into the day ahead market. In most cases, until you get to those high peak events, there's going to be, most balancing areas are going to have sufficient resources, and they're going to be able to meet the resource efficiency on a daily basis. And when we talk about resource efficiency, what we're trying to evaluate is every hour of those 24 hours of the day, do they have enough to meet their forecast load plus the covering the uncertainty. And we measure that by what they are either scheduling or offering through bids to the market. And we do that at a balancing area level. Okay. We also look for whether there's enough dispatch capability, movement capability of those resources to transit over the 24 hours. If you pass that test, then you are effectively in the pool, and you can, in being in the pool, you can get the benefits of the optimized transfers through the day ahead market, and you can go on to the real-time market as a pool together. Okay. And I just want to emphasize that, because remember, not everybody who's in energy imbalance market today is necessarily going to transition to the day ahead market. But if you were to transition to the day ahead market, you have an opportunity to pass the sufficiency evaluation in day ahead and then be in the common pool going into the real time, so you don't have to pass the sufficiency evaluation in real time alone again. Okay, that is a benefit, because then to those who are joining the extended day ahead market. So we consider the resource efficiency evaluation it's not a must offer obligation. It is a offer incentive obligation, if you want to consider that. In other words, you can offer as much as you need to pass that sufficiency evaluation. The market incentive should incentivize you to offer more. Okay. And we see that as a value, but it also provides some autonomy that if you have need to conserve some of your energy limited resources, you're able to do that. You have some control of your resources. And so it's not a blanket must offer obligation. And even those entities who have must offer obligations like the ISO, oftentimes it doesn't apply to energy limited resources. It's tailored depending on the type of resource. So long story short, the resource efficiency evaluation is a universal connector of multiple RA and integrated resource programs. You pass that and you are in that pool together, and it allows for then the optimized solution to develop the minimum cost objective of meeting the expected load and imbalance reserves. The question is then, what if someone doesn't pass? And if you have the next slide, please, I'll get into a little bit of that. Oh, it's further down, sorry. Let's see here. Oh, no, go back one slide. Sorry. Let me finish off the So if you do not pass, this is an area where the stakeholder process is really important, because they provided us feedback. If we just borrowed at the time the energy imbalance market design, it would have said if you fail, you can't enjoy any additional incremental transfers above your base transfers. Okay. Through the discussions of the extended day ahead market, and through discussions in parallel that were happening with the resource efficiency evaluation in the real-time market, we came to the conclusion that it was actually better to, if someone fails, allowing transfers to still occur, but charge a premium for failure and those transfers, because you're effectively relying on someone else's capacity. That capacity has value. And what we came to through the stakeholder discussions was a solution that recognized, based on the magnitude of your failure, how short you were, would be an increasing amount of premium on those transfers that would be optimized. But you were not locked out, and thus you were still able to benefit from the reliability effects. And we have other mechanisms to ensure that potential leaning doesn't go as far as to drag someone else into a reliability issue. There's mechanisms in there to protect against that from one balancing area to another balancing area. But there's a financial mechanism, and then we adopted also that's a similar financial mechanism in the energy imbalance market that basically charges a premium for failure of the sufficiency evaluation for any transfers above your ability to meet your own resource efficiency test. So that was that's the resource efficiency evaluation. Again, adapted it based on stakeholder discussion and input. Next slide, please. Since I discussed the GHG already, I'm going to be, I won't repeat myself, but the long story short here is that the greenhouse gas design does recognize different states' policy. Anywhere from California, where we have a cap and trade program, to Washington, which has a price program, but it has a different price. And to those states that don't have a program, or those states that have a non-price program, we recognize those. It allows us to optimize those resources, but allows us to price the energy in the areas that have a GHG policy region based on the GHG adder price. And for those states that don't, they do not see that price, and the price that they pay is not impacted directly by that GHG component. So that's the bottom line. GHG policy is something that continues to evolve, and we have a current stakeholder working group that says, what can we do beyond the EDAM day one? And those discussions are ongoing and benefiting greatly from thoughts across the West, including Doug Howe, who has engaged in this topic and has some additional new ideas about how to control the amount of GHG through the transfers, not just quantify and attribute them and price them. So a lot of good input on that. We are not at a place in that working group to say we have a new idea or new solution that's implementable, but I expect over the next 6 months to a year, we will lay out what the next evolution of GHG policy and design in the marketplace will be. Next slide, please. So this topic, the transmission revenue recovery, is the one area that is currently still in front of FERC. We filed that about a month ago. There's comments, actually very supportive comments, that are now in place, and we're expecting a decision sometime, hopefully in mid-June. And the question here that we tried to come up with a solution is how do you incentivize the transmission being made available, but do it in a way that avoids shifting costs? Transmission is not free, and avoiding shifting costs for the transmission that's now being made available that may not be getting compensated through short-term sales now, but it's being made available to the market. And how do you do that in a way that doesn't undermine the overall objective, and that is getting the efficient dispatch and unlocking that minimum cost solution itself? So what we came up with was we didn't want to create additional artificial friction, economic friction through hurdles that would have impeded that economic efficient dispatch. Rather, what we said was, well, for those who are participating in the EDAM, presumably those are the same entities at some level that were benefiting and maybe entering into short-term sales and utilizing the transmission previously. Now they're using the transmission in a slightly different way. So that brought us to the idea of how do we quantify the historical transmission sales, take that bucket of money, and then allocate the cost of that to those entities who are now participating in the extended day ahead market. And that is the essence of the primary of the proposal. And that would, done correctly and done successfully, there will be no cost shift. All the historical short-term sales will be recovered through allocation of those transmission costs to others. That was one component of that transmission, how to compensate transmission. Two other components, and that was presumably entities are building new transmission, okay? And to the extent that new transmission adds additional transfer capability for EDAM to optimize on, is there an opportunity for EDAM to also compensate that new transmission to a degree? And what we concluded was, so long as that new transmission was approved, not because of EDAM, but because of other processes, and it was adding transfer capability, and what we would do is we said the ratio or the proportion of short-term sales that the historical transmission was to the overall transmission revenue requirement, we will allow new transmission to recover a portion of its cost from EDAM if new transmission was added. And that was important for some entities. Having that ability to get a little bit of recovery for that new transmission was an important feature, knowing that new transmission is coming. Okay, that's the second component. Third component of it was the amount of benefits depends on where you are in the EIM or EDAM footprint. There are some entities that are in the middle, okay? And for those entities in the middle, they tend to be the highway where transmission is providing benefits to optimize use through their system, but not necessarily always to their system or from their system. And we've seen where the volume of transfers through an entity exceeded the amount of transfer into or out of that entity. That's where we want to cover the and recognize that they should probably get a little bit of cost recovery for facilitating those surplus or excessive wheel throughs their system, because they may not be benefiting themselves through the load side or the supply side. And so that was the third component. It's not always going to kick in. It's only going to kick in when you have this excess amount of transfers through beyond the gross transfers in or out. Okay, so that was the third component. As a package, we think these are all important to incentivize participation in the EDAM so that there's no cost shifting, but it also incentivizes maximizing that transmission being made available. Okay, so that was the transmission revenue recovery. We are waiting for FERC. That's the one area that we are waiting for FERC for final decision on. We filed that. We did file that expressing the importance of all three components, but we also did express those are severable. In other words, they are comfortable with the historical, give us at least that. If you want us to go back and look at the other ones more closely, we can do that, but they are all important to get the overall incentives right. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. This topic of non-jurisdictional transmission customer participation was important because one, from two perspectives. One is to make sure that there wasn't a free rider concept where someone could be just drop a generator into a system and then not have transmission to the border and not pay for transmission. Okay, so what we did was we said anybody who is participating, they at least either have to have a some type of transmission, point-to-point transmission or some kind of short-term transmission. And if they don't, that's okay. What they're going to be charged is for their production, they're going to be charged what is the lowest granular transmission rate for that area, so that we avoid a free rider situation. And that allows both for wide participation, but also not free rider concept. The other thing is that those who have transmission and acquired transmission from a balancing area or a transmission provider under oath or under a legacy agreement, we want to make sure that those customers feel their rights are being respected. And that goes to whether they can exercise those rights by self-scheduling, they can release those rights and be compensated through, if there's congestion, for their use, or do they get access charge themselves because they are providing transmission and making that transmission available. So long story short is we've covered the transmission perspective from the transmission provider, the owner itself, and we provided mechanisms for any transmission customer to both utilize and benefit and engage in the optimization, but also make sure that their rights are being respected. Next slide, please. Some topics that were taken up during the stakeholder process and frankly evolved based on the input. One of those topics was bidding at the intertie itself of an EDAM entity. This was an important topic because just full visibility, the California ISO in its market, at its border, we do have intertie bidding, okay? And the question is, well, should intertie bidding be available to any balancing area that's in the EDAM? And that question goes back to the balancing area. This is where the balancing area really plays an important role, because having intertie bids at the border does create some uncertainties. It affects your operating reserve. It affects your flows across your system. It creates some uncertainties with that. And the feedback that we got, and what we responded to was a balancing area did not feel like they should be forced to offer intertie bidding at their border. It should be their decision whether they offer intertie bidding at their border. It doesn't mean that you can't schedule at the border, but having economic bidding where you don't know where it's coming from, you don't know the source of it, created some uncertainty for the balancing areas. So we created some autonomy and some deference to the balancing area to make the decision whether to enable intertie bidding at their border or not. In the long term, I think they may see why intertie bidding may be beneficial, creates liquidity, but they have to get comfortable with that. It doesn't undermine reliability or uncertainty concerns in their area. So that's one area that we were deferential to the balancing area. The other one is on convergence bidding or virtual bidding. Virtual bidding is something that is common to most markets. It provides additional liquidity, allows you to hedge between the day-ahead price and the real-time price. But frankly speaking, having a day-ahead market is new to entities. And there was discomfort about being just offer unfettered convergence bidding up front. And so we provided a mechanism where that balancing areas could evaluate that. And we felt like there could be, it was fine if some balancing areas had virtual bidding and some areas didn't. California ISO, as part of its tariff, has virtual bidding, except at the interties for its area. Other balancing areas that engage in the extended day-ahead market will have the opportunity to decide when they introduce the virtual bidding into their system. Again, once they get the market up and running, they get comfort. I think they would realize what the benefit of virtual bidding is in providing liquidity and helping converge the prices between the day ahead and real time, but they have to get experience with the marketplace to do that. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, I'm now shifting into where we are in just our overall execution and implementation. I've already described the history of where we got in terms of our approval. We had approval from FERC on our EDAM design, our policy, but for the access charge, we had that in December of 2023, and we're waiting for that for the access charge. We are now actively moving into implementation. We are working with our first movers. PacifiCorp has signed an implementation agreement for EDAM a few weeks ago, and the balancing area in Northern California is in the process of evaluating and working with their customers when they will be executing an implementation agreement and kind of scheduling. This is all leading, we're in the middle of implementation of our day ahead market enhancements, which is a parallel design effort, and the EDAM. We are doing that now. We'll be in testing in 2025, and we are targeting basically a launch, first mover participants onboarding in spring of 2026. I wish I could tell you exactly who was going to be in that first class of 2026. Certainly PacifiCorp, I can tell you that. I am hopeful Bank will be in that. There may be others who are wanting to be in still a 2026 onboarding. We expect that we will have a regular cadence of onboarding every year, just like we did in the energy and balance market, where we will have spring onboarding. It will be it's roughly an 18 to 24 month process to onboard. Next slide, please. This slide is a little busy, but I think you can quickly get the essence of it and the importance of the net connectivity. The size of the areas kind of represents kind of the load size. The lines between represent the transfer capability under EIM and presumably under EDAM. There may be additional transfer paths that are discovered between now and EDAM. So specific to PNM and El Paso, this is something Commissioner Aguilar, you mentioned earlier. I don't want to get into the details of the connectivity, but it is our understanding that there may be some connectivity, at least between PNM and other entities that are going to be in EDAM day one. We believe that there may be some connectivity there. There may be some connectivity from the California border through Palo Verde back, and there may be some new connectivity that may be developing as a result of some of the new transmission that is developing in terms of bringing wind from New Mexico to California. How that all plays out and the mechanisms for doing that, it's probably a little premature to fully understand that, but we believe that there is connectivity, some direct connectivity. There is also connectivity potentially through rights and entitlements across other people's systems. This is where the discussion about reciprocity and enabling, how does another area who has providing transmission to an entity, how will they enable transmission optimization across their system? This does get a little bit into SEAMS discussions, but my prevailing view is that ultimately transmission entitlements, to the extent those entitlements are agreed to between the transmission customer and the transmission provider, and they agree that those rights allow for optimized use, they should be able to be optimized, and we believe that markets can optimize that even though an intervening entity may not be in EDAM itself. Okay, that's how EIM is working. EIM worked through transmission rights that were going across entities who were not in EIM at the time. And we believe EDAM can do the same. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn to governance now. Governance is an important topic. It's a evolving topic, and frankly speaking, it evolved even in EIM. Where we are with the governance today in EIM is a joint responsibility for approving policy, market policy, between the governing body, EIM governing body, and the ISO board. There are advisory committees. One very important engaged committee is the body of state regulators. Commissioner Aguilera, I think you're the vice chair of that right now. Appreciate your engagement on that. The body of state regulators really does allow for the regulators across the West to engage, understand where market design is going, and even provide input to the governing body as they make decisions about new design. And so we appreciate that opportunity. They also provide, I know they provide funding and helping training. They funded the training for the Western Energy Board training that happened last week, which Commissioner Ellison, you participated in. That's another opportunity. I think under EDAM, the body of state regulators will even have a more important role because of the nature of the footprint and the nature of the topics that are being discussed there. So the body of state regulators is quite important. The overall governance has evolved, and we see that the continued evolution to support something like EDAM will continue to evolve. I'm not here to talk about pathways efforts. The ISO is not driving the pathways efforts, but we are engaged with the pathways effort. The pathways effort is where regulators and stakeholders have gotten together and they're exploring ways to continue to evolve the governance so that ultimately you can get to a point where they have an independent governing body over market issues. I think it's important. We support that effort. What comes out of that effort, the California ISO stands ready to execute and support what comes out of that. And we hope that that helps drive governance change that then drives ultimate broader participation and engagement in EDAM. Now, they call it pathways because ultimately the idea is it a pathways to a potential for RTO? I think that's the ultimate objective, but I think this incremental step of evolving the governance to support EDAM and then creating a pathway to RTO is the right place for the West. I don't think there's anybody quite ready to move just straight to an RTO at this point. Next slide, please. Well, this slide is kind of what I just said. We've evolved the governance structure for EIM as the EIM grew itself. We have further evolved it so the scope of the joint authority over matters is no longer just real time. It's the day ahead market structure and the market rules under EDAM. And then what's further and beyond that is really what's being discussed through the Pathways Initiative. Next slide, please. So the cost structure of the extended day ahead market, just as we did with EIM, we tried to make the cost structure a very efficient, building on what is already was built for the ISO. We were able to leverage that for EIM, and we believe we were able to do that again for the extended day ahead market. This is the benefit of having the market operator being also in that market and being a market operator in that market. We are already a market operator in California. It doesn't mean that we are imposing our market on the rest of the West, because we certainly are evolving it based on the needs of the broader West. But having that infrastructure, the computing capability, allows us to leverage that and reutilize that. And that allows us to have a very moderate implementation fee, about $1.2 million for installed payments over that implementation ever for onboarding an entity who's an EIM already to participate in the extended day ahead market. The ongoing costs for participating in the EDAM, we came up with a ramped in structure. It basically charges both supply volume and load volume. But on the load volume, we ramp that in. So the first year, 2026, would be 5% of the total, what we call grid management charge to load. And then it ramps up to 25% year 2, 50% year 3, 75% year 4, and then the 5th year would be 100% of the load charges at that point. That ramp in is intended to allow the experience to be gained, the value to be gained, and allow the EDAM to grow and naturally, and also incentivize early participation, to be honest. The more participation, the less costs, or the more costs are spread over a wider footprint. So, and that allows for that natural growth to occur, incentivizing early adoption over a 5-year period. I know you may have a question about, well, what will it cost specifically to PNM or El Paso Electric? I can give you some rough numbers on an annual basis, but my answer is somewhat dependent on who else is participating. Okay. So I'll give you a couple numbers. So for PNM, it'll probably be about gross costs about $8 to $10 million a year, but of that, they're already paying about $3.2 million annually for EIM. So there's a duplicate that will not be duplicated. So net incremental is about $4 to $5 million incremental. For El Paso Electric, it's roughly about 60% of that. Okay. Next slide, please. I already mentioned this, but I want to emphasize it again. It was really important, one, that the Western Resource Adequacy Program be supported, and it was important not recognizing that entities may be members of the Western Resource Adequacy Program may be in Markets Plus, they may be in EDAM, they may be in neither one of those markets. It was important that we resolve any interoperability issues to ensure that the resources and the sharing of those resources in RAP was enabled, especially to the extent they're using their rights, transmission rights, to do so. So we had several discussions, and ultimately we got to a point where we recognized that through those transmission rights and allowing those transmission rights to be exercised pursuant to the transmission owners and the providers' terms and conditions, we can support, and if they need to, all the way from either carving out transmission, we could do that, or alternatively, making that transmission available and allowing them prioritize use of that transmission. If they don't use it day ahead, allowing them to use it in real time if they are needing to under those rights, and that helps support the RAP program. I think we got to a good place, and at this point, I'm not aware of any remaining concerns from the Western Resource Adequacy Program in terms of that interoperability issue. In the longer term, I think there's still opportunity to be discussions to be had between resource adequacy programs. We have a California resource adequacy program. It's been up and running for many years. It's enabled us to bring on more resources along with the integrated resource planning process. And even since 2020, we've added 15,000 megawatts of resource capacity. So we do believe, for the rest, it's important to have a resource adequacy program, and that resource adequacy program has to be harmonized potentially with other resource adequacy programs, but also be interoperable with markets, one or more markets that are maybe operating in the West. And so we think we've achieved that, and we'll continue to strive for that as things get executed, either on the RAP side or on the market side. I'm sure we're going to have continued discussions to make sure all our objectives are being met. Next slide, please. So transparency is an important topic in general to markets. Having everybody have the same information and operating on that information is critically important. The ISO has historically provided many venues of data and information, and we're further enhancing that for EDAM. We have annual reports by our Department of Market Monitoring, extensive reports about how the market's operating. We have daily reports of information about how the transmission and the results of the market results, whether it be prices, through our Oasis page. Some of this information is extracted and used by regulators, but also market participants themselves. It's also used by FERC. We share all our data with FERC, and they also use that data to analyze how the market is operating. It's important because it is important to make sure the market is operating well, it's working efficiently, and if there's any issues that are not working well, we can go after and address those issues. I am sure that when EDAM starts, there will be a request for additional data, even beyond what we're offering, and we have a very flexible process for requesting additional data that may be necessary. Some of that will be commercially sensitive, and so we may have to say, well, we may not be able to make that available for 90 days because of the commercial sensitivity, but where we can, we will make whatever data we can available. We're actually enhancing our Oasis information, and we'll be able to do some bulk downloads. So anybody who wants to do research and large bulk downloads, they will be able to do that as well. Next slide, please. Going forward, the tariff is not static. The market rules are not static. We've already stood up working groups to discuss GHG, resource adequacy, price formation, and those working groups are already looking out ahead, and gas coordination. Sorry, gas coordination is another one. Where we want to go next, what things can we do beyond the first day of EDAM? And those stakeholder processes have already started, and they may incorporate or identify additional tariff changes that may come through. They may even identify tariff changes that may be necessary to file even before going live, but would be effective after go live, maybe 6 months or a year later. So those processes are going. We have an annual process of developing a prioritized roadmap of what topics need to be considered and addressed, and we go through that process. And again, under EDAM, many of these will go to the joint board and EIM governing body together. And then as the governance changes, that will evolve. Where those go for decision will evolve as well. The tariff writing itself it also goes through an iteration. So before we file, we're transparent. We provide draft tariff language and receive comments back on that before we ultimately file at FERC. So with that, that's the conclusion of my presentation. Hopefully I didn't drone on too much, and I look forward to any questions I can answer.
Thank you so much. So just to talk about logistics a little bit, I think that maybe the commissioners can ask some questions on this, and I'll ask to see if staff has any questions, and then see if anybody else in the room or on Zoom has questions. We will, and specific to what was presented here, we will have another sort of question and answer session after SPP presents.
Okay.
And so, if you have a question that might be larger, might apply to both market operators, then that one's probably best saved till the end. And then, so after this, session of questions, I was thinking we could take a break as well. So, well, thank you for that presentation. I found it very informative, and even though I've sat through some of these before, I'm still learning more about it. So I appreciate that. You started with kind of the history of the EIM and EDAM, and it sort of seemed like incremental steps.
Yes.
I do recall that there had been discussions of, jumping into an RTO before, and that seemed very difficult for people at the time. And the one thing that I wanted to note is that I think the EIM has been very helpful in creating trust and confidence in markets around the West, because I think generally speaking, the West was more skeptical before. And so I am glad that we're in a different place now. And so, just wanted to mention that to start. You talked about the stakeholder process, and my understanding is that the stakeholder process has changed a bit in the way that the CAISO does it, to be more stakeholder driven. And so I'm curious how you think that is working out, and what comments you have received in response to the change.
Yeah. So first off, the stakeholder process has always been open. It's been open to all stakeholders. It's not specific members. It's not for just those who are participating in any level. Anybody can participate in that stakeholder process. I think where we have evolved it, and it really started with the extended day ahead market, is having some of those upfront, more stakeholder driven discussions, framing what the issues are, what's the topic. Whereas before, the ISO would issue a paper of the topic, kind of a framing paper, and then we quickly go into a straw proposal and then get comments back. And I think through the working group process, really the ISO stands back in that process and allows the stakeholders to really describe the issues, maybe even come up with and offers a broader set of solutions. And then we take that and we're in listen mode during that process largely. And then we try to document and kind of coalesce what the topic is and document that. And then we kind of go in through the rest of the stakeholder process. All the way along, the stakeholders provide us input. We adapt and respond to that input before we ultimately take the final proposal to the governing body and the board. I think it's a long process, and I'll be honest, some of the stakeholders get tired. I mean, there's a lot of activity, and you got to prioritize what things you're addressing, and not everybody's issue is getting addressed. And so you have to go through that. And that in itself is a stakeholder discussion. What is the most important thing for stakeholders? And that's kind of our road mapping process that we're under right now, is what is trying to prioritize what is the next set of policy development that needs to be considered.
Okay, thank you. The one point that I would, just want to highlight, and I'm sure you're aware, but is I think with a stakeholder driven process, it's important to make sure that the different stakeholders are engaged, because a lot of us are overwhelmed and cannot participate necessarily to the level that we would like. And so some of those interests might be left behind if there are certain stakeholders that just have more resources and a lot at stake.
Yeah. Oftentimes to address that, sometimes sectors will assign certain leads to the discussion, or they'll work through associations, and then the association will supply comments. So there's various ways to address that. But yeah, I agree that keeping everybody engaged, making sure that no one's feels like they were left behind is a challenge.
Yeah, and speaking more directly to state regulators and consumer advocates, I think we have avenues like the BOSSR and the MSC to engage with markets, but it's always also a scramble. And so you present at BOSSR meetings and about timely topics, and I think that is a good way to make sure that at least regulators are engaged, and I hope that consumer advocates could get a similar treatment.
Just on that point, and I just want to make sure that I know BOSSR has availed themselves, but having the Department of Market Monitoring or the Market Surveillance Committee come and explain something that they're observing and their input is also another avenue to get kind of that perspective, because they do watch for behavioral issues and things like that the consumer or the regulators would want to understand. So having them come to you and access to them, I think is an important part of that as well.
Yep. Thank you. And markets are always being refined, and so there's always a new initiative to stay updated on. And then with respect to transmission utilization and connectivity, I think, I don't know if this is necessarily a question. I'm kind of thinking of, how the RSC ensures that there is enough transmission capability, but I'm also looking at the very busy slide on slide 13 that you provided that has, kind of the lines going to different entities.
Yeah.
And, as I'm looking at this and I was hearing your presentation, you noted that, there are seams, and I sort of see the seams being doubly complicated because there are seams between the market operators, but then it also appears that some of the rules will be in individual OATs, such as how the customers' rights are treated. And so there are seams between, the markets, but also seams between transmission providers. And so that could be very complicated. I also think that this is just generally very important because there are a lot of these elements from the markets that we're talking about that are, basically the same. I mean, they're fundamentally similar markets, but one thing that will matter a lot is who is participating, who you can transact with, which resources will be available to the market and how much transmission will be available. So that's something that, you know, I'll continue to look at. And then with respect to resource adequacy, you know, one thing you mentioned is that it's up to the entity. Because really what you're doing is a resource evaluation. So it's not aside from, you know, California, which has its different RA program, it's not dictating certain levels of RA that needs to be carried. And I'm just thinking about that, you know, as we're as state regulators, you know, how we should feel about that, because on the one hand, it's up to the entity, but it's also kind of up to the state, because it allows that procurement process to move forward and not necessarily be dictated by an RTO, or you know, market operator, although that also might be a good thing, if it is.
Yeah, and just to be clear, when I said the entity, I kind of expected it would be entity working with their state regulator. And because you're exactly right.
Okay. I'll ask one more question before I turn it over. With respect to the GMC, there's a certain percentage that the entering entities will be charged. Kind of had a scale there. Who pays for the rest of that?
So trying to think about when you say who pays for the rest of.
Well, I understood that there's like a grid management charge, and then there's like, if this year you'll be charged 25% of that.
Yeah, so I probably need to do a very good job of explaining that. So there's two sides of this. There's a supplier side they will pay. So our grid management charge fully recovers our costs. Okay. How we allocate that out depends on the footprint that we are dealing with. So our grid management charge today is largely charged to California utilities and ultimately consumers. Okay. Broadening that out to EDAM, a portion of that will be spread over a broader footprint. And so both supply and demand would ultimately be picking up the cost of that grid management charge, because there's a supply side portion and a demand side portion.
Yeah.
What I described that ramp in was describing the ramp in for demand. The supply is not ramped in. And the reason why we don't ramp the supply side is we can't create an inequity of suppliers who have different charge structures that are coming into the market, because it would disadvantage and advantage one over the other. So that's why we didn't do a ramp in for the supply side, but the load side we could.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again, Chairman.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a couple, how big is the bid box type questions? So, you know, you're talking about the total benefits for the EIM, and that EDAM is gonna have a broader economic potential. Is there kind of a multiplier to think of?
Yeah, you can't take the 5% and then grow it by the other 95%. It doesn't work that way. What I've seen is probably multiples of doubling the benefits at times, and it depends on the scenario, it depends on the footprint, but it's a kind of doubling the benefits or a fraction of those benefits.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then similar, just curious how El Paso is 60% of PNM in terms of like grid management charge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of them as roughly the same size, but I could be wrong there.
I think total energy consumption over the years different in terms of the size, the peaking. I think you're right.
Okay, so it's sales or load.
Yeah, it's total energy.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. One question I had was regarding transmission under EDAM, the status quo, and I'll just take our PNMBA, which is the only one I'm aware of where we've got wind generation and transmission rights to California. I understand the status quo is that that transmission is done with dynamic scheduling, which I understand, allows any free capacity on that line. Because the wind energy is variable, you're going to have free capacity, allows it to be used for other market purposes such as EIM. So if that BA were to join EDAM, would that wind power and transmission rights owner still be able to use dynamic scheduling to get their power into California, or would they need to be using a pseudo tie arrangement?
No, the dynamic scheduling mechanism would allow for that. From our perspective, it would allow for that to be optimized. Where I think the pseudo tie, I think if you're contrasting it, that the transmission is kind of set aside for that pseudo tie itself, and can't be optimized or can't be shared with something else. My answer on the dynamic, though, is caveated that that is subject to working out the entitlements. If that transmission entitlement allows for optimized use for something other than the primary resource that it was meant for, that's a discussion that needs to happen between the transmission customer and the provider. And in this case, I think there are intervening transmission providers that would have to weigh in on that question. I can't do that myself.
Okay, thank you.
Does staff have any questions in the room? I'm not seeing any. Okay, and then first I'll ask if staff has any questions online. I'll wait a little bit. Okay, it looks like not. Patrick, do you mind looking to see who has any questions online? There seems to be a hand up.
Yeah, a representative from El Paso Electric had their hand up. I don't
Okay.
know if they're-
Yep, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Emmanuel Villalobos and Judy Parsons on behalf of El Paso Electric. So we just wanted to thank you, Commission, for allowing us to attend this workshop virtually, and also to the parties that are presenting during today's workshop. This is very informative and very helpful. We had a few pages worth of questions, but I think this presentation was so informative, we've kind of checked them all off with the exception of a couple. So one question that we have is, you mentioned during your presentation with regards to GHG, that New Mexico has a non-price GHG mechanisms, and then you also touched on other states that have the GHG pricing mechanisms. But what efforts is EDAM making to help to try to harmonize those GHG efforts amongst the West? Could you give us a little bit more description on the GHG working group, some of the efforts, those discussions? Because we agree, this is a very complicated topic, and I think it differs by states depending on the requirements of the different states. So any feedback that you could give us on that, we'd really appreciate.
Yeah, we do invite and encourage regulators to participate in the GHG workshops, whether it be from CARB or other states. And it is a venue that creates an opportunity to not only discuss the market design as it relates to GHG, but also create some opportunity for the emissions regulators to discuss their programs and maybe some opportunity to harmonize those programs. I don't think we can force that harmonization, but I think we can create the venue of discussion that encourages it. And I think we've always mentioned in those discussions that the more they're harmonized, the better off the market can operate across the different GHG footprints. So that's one. I think we've also tried to provide where programs, say non-price programs, could benefit from additional transparency and information. We are working to provide that information. And so I think we've come up with a way of providing the average intensity of transfers into a region or a state to help inform the intensity of that information in their non-priced program. And we can do that for other states. So that's how at least we could play a role in providing information that could be shared and used by different states and their programs. I think just the conversation that is happening, it is a complex issue. Just the opportunity to have the conversation, I think, generates new ideas, and this is where things like Doug Howe has provided some new input, new ideas that we're considering, and that is another place or an opportunity for harmonization. Those new ideas may be the link to bringing different programs together in a better way.
Thank you so much. That was very informative.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions in the room at the moment? Okay, looks like we do not. Anybody else online? I can't see the hands that are raised, so Patrick, maybe if you could manage that.
Commissioner, no one else has raised their hand.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So I'll ask one more question and then we can take a 10-minute break and then SPP can go, and thank you for your patience. On slide 7, you were talking about the resource sufficiency evaluation, and you said that for any entity that is coming in and fails the RSC, there is a premium put on that. How is that premium determined?
The surcharge or the premium goes to look at the some of the price indices like at Mid-C and a Palo Verde, and it ties it to a 16-hour block cost of that block, and that kind of becomes the basis of the surcharge. And it kind of reflects the fact that, well, if you didn't have enough capacity to meet your sufficiency evaluation, you're covering a portion of the capacity costs, and that indice, that bilateral indice, embed some of that.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you for the presentation. I think we can take a slightly longer than 10-minute break and come back at 2:30.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, we're getting started. So sorry to break up the party, but we're getting started again, and I do want to make a quick note for those who aren't here. We have representatives from El Paso Electric, PNM, SPS, in addition to CAISO and SPP, and we also have Rita and representatives and MNERD representatives. So thank you so much for coming in. And we also have staff. And so we have a pretty packed room, even though it's a small room. So it's not hard to do. And so now we have SPP here with us, and thank you again for coming, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the invite to come out and speak. My name is Paul Seski. I serve as Executive Vice President, General Counsel for SPP. I'm joined by Carrie Simpson, our Senior Director of Western Market Activity, as well as SEAMS, and Kim Ogwin, who is Senior Director of State Regulatory Policy, who is a past president of our Regional State Committee and a former commissioner from the great state of Arkansas. We're going to tag team this presentation. I'll kick it off, give a high-level overview of SPP, particularly with an emphasis of the expansion efforts we have going in the West. Then I'll walk through Markets Plus governance, and then at the conclusion of that, turn it over to Carrie and Kim, and they'll weigh in various points and times during the presentation. So if you can go to the next slide. This slide shows you the geographic footprint in which SPP is either an RTO, is operating an energy imbalance market, or is in some way, shape, or form involved. I'd like to point out that if you notice on the green, that is our RTO footprint. It has expanded over time, and I'll walk through that in a couple more slides. And notice that you see the green part of eastern New Mexico is NSPP RTO. It has been for 20 years that we've been an RTO, and actually SPS was a founder of SPP's members in 1941. SPP was formed 8 days after Pearl Harbor to help make aluminum in Arkansas, because the largest deposit of bauxite in North America is in Arkansas. To make aluminum for the war, had to have a lot of energy to melt various components to make aluminum. And so the regional compact that came together in 1941 is still around today. Then you also see we are a Western Reliability Coordinator, RC Services in the West, our WISE market that I'll talk about a little bit. And we are also a program operator for the RAP program that's been mentioned earlier. And then in the orange, which is primarily why we are here to speak, is to talk about the Markets Plus effort and the pending filing at FERC. Go to the next slide. This next slide shows you in the light red is the SPP existing footprint. To give you a little bit of background, we have had 2 significant expansions in the past, and we're about to move to a third. If you take a look at basically the state of Kansas south into Texas and New Mexico and even into Louisiana, that was our original footprint that was formed in 2004. In the 2008-2009 timeframe, Nebraska joined. Interesting addition. Nebraska is 100% public power under state law. So they joined in 2008. And then the integrated system that we refer to as the IS, which is the Dakotas, part of North Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa, joined the SPP RTO in 2015. So with each one of these expansion efforts, there are various changes you have to make and adjustments. When the IS joined the integrated system, the Western Area Power Administration, Upper Great Plains Division joined, and that was the first time a federal power marketing agency had joined an RTO. And so that's our footprint today. Now, if you transition to the dark red, That is the RTO expansion. And what is that? These are a number of utilities. All of them are currently in our WISE market, the Western Energy Imbalance Service market, and they have chosen to move a step further. And in that step further to move to RTOs, they have the binding signed agreements to join the RTO, which financially binds them to go through the process, or the cost, I should say, we have for that process. And so that was approved by the membership through the MOPSI in April. It was approved by the SPP board last week. Chairman O'Connor was there and a part of it. Was also 2 provisions were approved by the Regional State Committee and regards to this expansion, and we will be filing it by the end of the month at FERC. And so this is the expansion. So it'll be the 3rd major expansion as an RTO. And if you look in the right, you'll see the names of the entities that are joining. And although these maps aren't great detail, but I will point out the city of Farmington, which is a municipality in New Mexico, as well as Aztec, will be served by the market and be a part of the RTO West. Next slide. Next, we'll transition to Markets Plus. So Markets Plus is an effort that has been going on for, I'd really say, several years, but essentially in 2022, we took basically a year-long process to develop the framework, the high-level framework of how Markets Plus would work. We also worked on a governance model, a number of variations and drafts that went through a stakeholder process that we ultimately made as a service offering in 2022. If entities want to sign up, there was a threshold that we needed so many megawatts to sign up. Not only did that threshold get met, it was greatly exceeded. And you can see by the footprint of who signed up. So the impact, which is the highest body of stakeholders, approved the Markets Plus tariff in February. The IMIP, which is the interim Markets Plus independent panel that I'll talk about a little bit later, approved it March 1st, the SPP board on the 25th. We made a filing at FERC, and we've asked on March, into March, and we asked, actually, it was Carrie Simpson's birthday. It was a big birthday present for her. And then we've asked FERC for an order on July 31st. An incredible stakeholder process, busy. The stakeholders did choose to have an abbreviated timeline, but this is where Markets Plus has, and we'll get a little more detail on that. Next slide, please. Now we're going to transition to Markets Plus overview. I'll talk about governance a little bit, and then Carrie's really going to deep dive into the market products. We can go to the next slide, next couple slides. So we'll talk about governance. What really sets us apart is a big question we're often asked. First is an independence governance. Our board of directors are truly independent. They meet the FERC requirements of Order 2000 independence. We have 10 board members today. Only 1 live in our footprint. And over our 20 years as an RTO, we've had about 25 or 26 board members, maybe up to 27 by now, but only 2 have ever lived in our footprint. So they are truly independent. They're independent from market participants, and they have to meet those requirements. A next one, and also, which we'll talk about in governance, is you'll have an independent panel that will oversee Markets Plus, that it too will be independent, and it will be actually selected through a robust stakeholder process. Next, custom market design that Carrie will get into the details of the market design. This truly was a market design that the stakeholders vetted, worked through, debated, redebated, sometimes strongly disagreed, but ultimately came up with the following that we have pending at FERC. Also, access to a diverse fleet of resources. The footprint has a number of diverse resources, and we think that's always important, as we found in our footprint, to bring low cost value to end-use customers by really leaning on the diversity of resources. And then the next is a pathway to RTO. Some of the entities in Markets Plus have indicated they do want this as a path to RTO membership. Some have indicated they just want to stay as at this point as a Markets Plus only. So, but it is an option and a pathway that you can go forward. Carrie, anything you want to add to slide 7?
No, I think you covered it well. No, I think you covered it well. I think the only other thing I would add is,
we see the independent governance as really important for ensuring equity in markets. So I think all markets create benefit. All the different studies that come out show, you're going to get so much of a pie of benefits, right? If you think of it in that term. But I think governance, the right governance helps ensure that that customers are getting their right share of that pie, that it's equitable. And so I think SPP's processes and how we do it have demonstrated that equity throughout our time in the East and what we've brought over to the West.
All right, thanks, Carrie. Next slide. So let's talk about governance. So as I said, in 2022, we had basically a year-long process, multiple iterations, multiple meetings with the stakeholders and said, how do you want to design the governance for Markets Plus? SPP staff rolled out a straw proposal, got robust feedback, and continued to modify it through a number of iterations. And then ultimately, we put this governance into a service offering and said, if you are interested in signing up, you're welcome to do so. And obviously, we greatly exceeded what our expectations were. We call it governance designed by the West for the West. Because once this governance was offered as a part of Markets Plus, there were times that the stakeholders wanted to tweak and modify the governance, and they did. When we went through the drafting of the governance of what it would look like, we got feedback and we modified it. And I'll talk about the independent panel as one of them. So we did. So it's ultimately driven by the stakeholders, what type of governance they want. Our drivers of the governance that you had to have independence for FERC Order 1000 requirements. You had, or 2000, I should say, you have to have independence in regards to complying with what staff does, and that they must ensure that they in no way can be influenced or receive money or have connections with any market participant. And so ultimately, it was a good test to see what would happen. And so from roughly April to April, the Markets Plus, I'd say April to March, there was a number of votes of the Markets Plus. The consensus level after much debate and a lot of committee work was at 97% of the impact voting. And the ultimate governance structure was approved in the low 90s, or the ultimate FERC filing. And so it showed that it's worked, and based upon the participants' feedback, they've been happy with this process. Again, it is dynamic. It is not fixed. The stakeholders want to modify the governance. We can do that. We'll take it and file it for FERC approval. Next slide. Spend a little bit of time on this box by walking through the governance. And I'll stop at the top, and that is the SPP Board of Directors. As I said earlier, we have 10 directors, 9 are non-SPP employees. They're independent. And then our president and CEO, Barbara Sugg, is also a board member. I always like to point out what's unique about our governance structure is there's a voting process. Carrie, Kim, and I are very involved, highly involved in the stakeholder process. We get no vote. We make no decision. We can offer ideas, we can offer our opinions, but ultimately it's driven by the stakeholders through the stakeholder process, overseen by, in this case, an independent panel that I'll talk about it in the independent board of directors. So what's the board of directors role? This is a contract service that SPP is offering to utilities in the West. So if a utility chooses to sign up for this service, they will sign up for it, and you got to meet the terms and conditions of the contract as well as the tariff. So that's really the board's role. And so the board last month voted to say, in March, voted to say they want to offer this service. And so now it's pending at FERC. And then next you have the Markets Plus independent panel. I'll explain what this is. This panel was actually an addition based upon the 2022 feedback from stakeholders. There was such a concern, surprised me how high it was in the West, to ensure that you had independence, that even though our board was fully independent, represented at the time, none of our board members actually lived in our footprint. The stakeholders still wanted a very Western specific oversight. So we formed the Markets Plus independent panel. Now for phase 1 that we are still in, instead of going out and expending the cost of getting 5 panel members, The decision was we use 3 SPP directors to serve as the interim Markets Plus independent panel, or the IMEP. 2 live in the West, and then 1 is from New York. And so they served on the interim. When we transition to the full Markets Plus, once the tariff is effective, the panel will go to 5 members. 1 will be an SPP director, and 4 will be independent panel members. If you look at the brown box, you will have a stakeholder process, 1 sector, 1 vote. The sector will select the individuals on that committee, and they will nominate people to be elected to the 4 positions on the IMEP or the MIP. Then the Markets Plus Executive Committee will elect them. So how is the interaction? On anything, basically anything, unless it is a material thing to SPP, like the budget, going into debt, or to take any actions to like hire a number of employees, it stops at the MIP. And from there, it would be filed at FERC. It would only be those items that would cross into SPP that the board would be required to look at. And then I'll drop below that. Next is the Markets Plus Executive Committee. That is where every entity who signs up to be a part of Markets Plus gets a vote. The vote is divided into 3 segments. 1/3 of the vote goes to IOUs. 1/3 of the vote goes to public power, which could be federal agency, co-ops, state or municipalities. And then 1/3 goes to the independent sector. That is entities that don't fall into the other categories, but that they can in turn vote within the other 1/3 sector. There is was some debate of how to divide up the 1/3 of the vote within the independent sector that we can talk about if you have questions. So when the impact votes, if there is it takes a 2/3 vote for a recommendation to go to the IMEP. So in other words, you have to have a strong super consensus of the stakeholders. From there, it'll go to the independent panel that will have ultimate authority. Now, I'd like to emphasize how this works, and a great example was the vote on the governance. The lowest vote we had going through the stakeholder process was how the vote structure should be worked for governance. The governance passed with just 72% of the vote. So it passed for approval to go to the impact, but as a result, it wasn't a strong consensus. So the IMEP approved the governance except for the one area that was in dispute. And so that one area that was in dispute, remanded it back down, formed a task force. And the task force came up with a voting protocol and process for the independent sector. Well, that passed overall with over 90%. Then that went to the IMEP and got approved. So just because you get a 2/3 vote does not mean that it's automatically going to be approved. So I've talked about the board, the impact, and the MIP. Kim, do you want to talk about the Markets Plus States Committee?
Sure. So the Markets Plus State Committee is made up of commissioners from all of the states in the West, including South Dakota and Nebraska and California, all represent the MSC. The leadership, previous leadership, of course, was Chair Blank from Colorado and Commissioner Tani from Oregon. I believe now we've changed leadership. The MSC changed leadership, and Arizona Commissioner Nick Myers will chair, and Idaho Commissioner John Hammond will be the vice chair for the group. And so the MSC has met weekly with the leadership has met weekly with SPP, staying engaged in what's going on throughout the first phase of the tariff filing. They've been very engaged in the process as far as tariff development, working in the working groups, participating in the task force. A lot of participation, a lot of meetings, I know, but they've been very engaged. Their input has been valuable, different from the RSC, and I believe you shared something about the RSC earlier about the authorities that the RSC have. Different from the RSC, the MSC serves in an advisory role. However, their advisory role is very meaningful. Paul just spoke about the passage of certain elements that goes through the impact into the IMIP, they may pass, but in the MSC, if share concerns on some of the issues, and even though they did pass, those issues did go back down to the working groups so they can get greater consensus. And so while they do not have the same authorities as the RSC, their input is very valuable and meaningful to the impact as well as the MIP. And so I think that's about all I want to share for now.
All right, and then I think Harry can talk about the working groups, task forces, and then transition into the market.
Sure. Yeah, so the green boxes there at the bottom reflect it's really where a lot of the work gets done and all the writing and the technical discussions take place. And then those items, as they come out of the working groups, go up to the impact for the policy of holistic view and vote. So let's go to the next slide to see those working groups and task forces. For Markets Plus, phase one, this is a tariff drafting effort and a protocol draft, or right now we're in the protocol phase. So as the tariff is being drafted, the groups were split up based on technical expertise to basically divide and conquer. And so we have a market design group. They're the most, I guess, holistic is probably the best word, looking at the entire market design, all the pieces together. So basically all of these groups on this list end up sending tariff language and ideas to the market design working group. Underneath the market design group is the GHG task force, which set up the rules that we put into the tariff for GHG. We also have a congestion rent task force to deal with congestion, rent, which I'll get to here when I go through the design. We did a transmission working group, not to look at planning or building transmission, right? Because it's just a market, but more of how the market uses transmission, what rights it has to optimize the capability that's on the system, including how does that capability that's made available to the market, is there a rate associated with that? We also had a reliability focused group. So one thing we have in the East that's been very valuable is you can have a great market design, but it might inadvertently conflict with something that's a NERC responsibility or a reliability issue. And so they oversee and make sure that anything we're creating out of our market is not impacting reliability in some way. So we have the same concept here. And so it was made up of entities who are on the non-merchant side of their organizations that are looking to make sure that anything that we created would not hinder reliability or have a NERC issue. And then the last group is the SEAMS group, which we've established because of the anticipation of SEAMS and understanding how interchange might work within the market and also with neighboring BAs and markets. And so that's where all of the words were developed in the tariff and ultimately presented to the impact. So that's the governance. I guess any questions, or I can stop and keep going into market design.
I was going to wait till the end, but
that's
if
fine.
you, I
It's
can
more of a
ask
habit
questions
for me
now.
to say, hey, stop.
Okay.
Governance. All right.
Okay. With respect to the with respect to the governance structure, there's this Markets Plus Nominating and Governance Committee. Apologize if I missed this, but who's going to comprise that committee?
Yeah, good question. It'll be one sector, one vote. In each sector, I think there's 10 or 11 sectors, they will self-select who their representatives are. And there will be one member from the MIP, as long as the member of the MIP is not up for consideration, because there'll be, 4 members of the MIP. And so what they will do will not only nominate the independent panel members for election by the impact, but they will also oversee governance changes. So let's say there's something in the governance that stakeholders want to tweak, they will vote on it. And then after they vote on it, then it'll go to the impact, then the IMET, and then FERC.
Okay, thank you. And then were the MPEC you mentioned sort of a third representation or vote from different sectors. Which sectors were they?
Sure, the first sector I'll call it is a third of the vote is the IOU sector.
Okay.
And their vote is load ratio share divided. So let's say Carrie and I were the only two IOUs. I'm 70%, she's 30%. That's how we would divide up the vote. And then the same for public power. Public power would be co-ops, municipal agencies, state agencies, and federal agencies. And then the third one is, we'll call everybody else the independent sector. That was the controversial aspect of governance, is how do you divide up that vote? And so once Markets Plus goes live, the decision was that at least half of that vote, and I'll explain why I say at least half of that third, goes to entities that have a commercial interest. There are market participants, they have generation in there or demand response or something. Then the other half would go to all other organizations. That could be NGOs, environmental groups, AARP, whoever would want to be involved. That's
Okay.
That structure.
And then is this third representation going forward or current?
So the current is one entity, one vote for phase one, and there will be a discussion of what will be for phase two, and the stakeholders will decide.
Okay.
You know, just my gut, I assume it'll remain one entity, one vote for phase two, but that will be up to the stakeholders to decide.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. I mean, I think that I should probably be involved whenever that conversation happens, because I certainly have thoughts. I mean, to switch over to the stakeholder process a little bit, you know, I mentioned to CAISO about having adequate representation from state regulators and consumer advocates. And really that comes from my experience with, you know, Markets Plus, and where I didn't feel like I had adequate representation, partially because the process was moving too quickly, and also, you know, it might have been this one participant, one vote situation, but and so I guess my request or comment, or, you know, for whatever it's worth, is I think that consumer advocates and state regulators need a larger role. I think when you think about a stakeholder-driven process, it sounds great in practice. If it's really these entities that have the most resources driving it, then it's not really fair. And so that, you know, that's one thing that I wanted to communicate with respect to that. But anyway, that sorry to interrupt. I think we can, unless you guys have anything on governance, we can keep moving.
Okay, let's go to the market design. Let's go to, I think it's slide 12. Oh, sorry, let's go to slide 12. So one thing about the process that we took was there was a desire by the entities participating in Markets Plus to get a tariff drafted swiftly. They didn't want to have to start from scratch, and they wanted to leverage something that already existed. So one of the reasons why we were able to move perhaps faster than I think other times we've created tariffs in tariff language is we largely ported over the marketplace tariff language from SPP's RTO. So we took that language and then determined what is it about the West that might need to change this tariff, what items. And so I'll talk about that. But I think importantly, the same tariff that we used as the basis and the foundation for Markets Plus is the market design that has been in place since 2014. It's created over $10 billion of savings for the existing RTO. It's also been able to integrate more renewables than any other RTO. So a lot of really powerful benefits that we think showed and demonstrated. It was already a strong basis, and we needed to tweak in order to help facilitate the West's participation. So that's just as the basis of what we started with. So what does that mean in terms of the basis? So let's go to the next slide. So if you looked at the East, in our East RTO tariff, you would see something very similar. In fact, I think the same picture is in it. In Markets Plus, it's a day-ahead market with a real-time market. A lot of times we get asked the question, if an entity joins Markets Plus, does that mean that they're also in SPP's energy imbalance market that exists right now, that's in Colorado and Wyoming? The answer is no. It's a separate market. And the reason you don't need to have that energy imbalance market for this construct is because it has its own real-time market. So it has a day ahead in a real-time market. It also has a reliability unit commitment process. So entities can offer in their generation and load day ahead. We clear it based on economics. And then we have another look to make sure we have enough generation committed. We may commit more. And then all of that information goes into our real-time market and is settled the difference between what happens in day ahead and real time. One big piece of Markets Plus that is different for most entities that are participating in markets in the West is that we settle directly with all market participants. So most entities, and I think this is true for the parties in New Mexico who are in the EIM, the balancing authority has a lot of the responsibility to help facilitate settlements to the parties inside of that BA. SPP has a different approach that settles directly with those parties. So it's one advantage is it's more consistent across the settlements of every BA that's in our market, because we're settling consistently with everyone. It also helps reduce some of the burden of the BA services that participating entities may have. So this is the same structure that we brought over. All the inputs and outputs that we have from the East, we included here in Markets Plus. So let's go to the next slide. This is a high level, and I can get as detailed as you want, but I'm going to try to stay high level. These are the areas where we modified or made changes to the market design to accommodate interest from the West. So, for example, Paul already talked about governance. SPP in its role here is not the transmission service provider, is not selling service, as we're not the balancing authority. And so transmission capability and how we know what capability we're able to use in our market was an issue we had to work through, and also congestion. So in most markets, physical transmission rights are converted into a financial right. It was decided to not port over that type of approach for Markets Plus. And instead, we have something called congestion rent, which prioritizes and gives revenues to entities who own the physical rights, which I can get to in more detail, but it's just at a high level. Resource adequacy, I'm going to talk about in more detail. GHG, we will too. Aggregate resource model. So there's a lot more hydro in the West in Markets Plus that was participating than what we have in our RTO. And so we had to add a type of way for a resource to offer in that could aggregate a bunch of hydro facilities that were connected. We also have a transmission use charge for how transmission providers are paid for the service or the capability that's being made available to the market. And then we have a market monitor for as a standard market. So let's go to the next slide. So WRAP, the Western Resource Adequacy Program is a requirement for all load serving entities in Markets Plus. It's a prerequisite. And this was considered an important requirement for Markets Plus participants to create uniform rules for determining resource adequacy and the accreditation process. And so all entities will have to attest to being in RAP. It also helps form what an entity has to offer into the market. And then the last piece there, remember, we're not the BA in this instance. So the functions that like PNM as a BA or El Paso as a BA continue to hold for like balancing services and ancillary services. Those continue to remain with the BAs. Let's go to the next slide. So transmission optimization, a big piece here is, since we're not the TSP, we have to depend on the participating TSPs who may sign up for Markets Plus to tell us what capability is available for the market to use. By default, everything that is in a participating TSP's capacity is basically available to the market to optimize. But so that we don't overstep our market clearing engine, we have those transmission service providers who are responsible for operating their systems and selling service to customers. They tell us what of their system we can optimize. And so they will have rules in their tariffs about how they'll determine what to give us. We have given an outline of that in our FERC filing. And then a big piece of this is we want to make sure we're respecting rights of parties who may not be participating or maybe a neighboring entity. And so that's a big piece of making sure that Markets Plus is optimizing what's been made available for it to optimize. Let's go to the next slide. As a part of that optimization, and Mark described it well earlier, it's a very similar concept. Because there's capability on the system that is now going to be available for the market to optimize, entities might not decide to buy transmission service day ahead anymore. They may just let the market optimize it for them. And by doing that, the transmission service providers may actually lose revenue. And that can be can create cost shifts to the customers of that TSP who are always taking that service from that transmission service provider. So we created a charge based on historical short-term revenues that these entities collect, and we allocate it to all transactions in the market. And so it's a way to help mitigate that potential cost shift and mitigate the rate impact that could occur. Let's go to the next slide. So here's GHG. SPP worked with stakeholders to incorporate programs for a pricing state. And I'll probably quickly turn it over to Kim. Do you want to hit these? Sure. Okay. I'm handing it to her. She's been the staff secretary and the expert on all this.
Not expert, but staff secretary. So we worked on the GHG, the task force for over a year. But Commissioner Aguilar also served on that task force. 6 representatives from the MSC, and also we have representatives from the IOUs, independent and public power represented on the task force. It was and Mark described it, it's a very weedy and complicated matter, but the task force did a great job of trying to come up with a design that accommodated the pricing program that's currently right now in Washington, but also ensuring that the impacts of that program would not flow over into the other non-pricing states. So that is we did that the first part of phase 1 or the tariff development. Also now, during this portion of the phase, we are working on the protocols, particularly concentrating now on the tracking and reporting for the non-price GHG programs. And if you flip to the next slide, it kind of starts, it states some of the assumption that the task force is currently working on what needs to be considered in looking at the framework for tracking and reporting. And ultimately, the task force is working on how you can allocate the energy from these resources to ensure that not only that the data is there, the data is available, is presented in an accurate and transparent way, and there's no double counting of these resources. And so we are in the middle stage. We've been doing a lot of work. The draft protocols for tracking and reporting is available now and posted to our website. There's comments that have been submitted. The intent behind initially was to vote on tracking reporting May 30th. However, listening to the states, commissions, and the need for more time to develop these tracking and reporting framework out to ensure that the data, accurate data, appropriate data is available in the manner in which is available to the states. We've postponed that vote and we'll work with the states. I believe we set a meeting for next Friday, May 24th, to talk with states about their needs of this type of data. And so that's where we are now. Nothing firm right now on tracker reporting, but we're making good progress.
Thank you. Because that was the last market design slide, and then I think we'll wrap up with. Oh, do you have something? Okay, we'll wrap up with who has been participating. So who are the 1/3 voting that took place in phase one? So we go to slide 21. You hit this.
Sure, I'll hit this. So these were the entities that chose to participate in phase one. Phase one was $9.7 million. Utilities funded that, and then you had a lot of non-utilities that wanted to be engaged. And so you can see it represents over 300 terawatt hours and on annual NEL and about 55 gigawatts of peak load. Kind of put things in perspective, that's what SPP's RTO peak load is. So significant group, diverse group of stakeholders that were engaged and involved. It was fascinating for me to help be a part of the team that developed the governance and then to see it work from at first a little bit of how do we make a motion and a second and vote all the way to the end where you just see it became routine and very effective process. Great to see it work and be successful. Note that 2 utilities in red, Arizona Electric Power Cooperative and WAPA Desert Southwest, has indicated they are not going to continue as a part of it, but they are because they've just what they indicated, they're not going to join any day ahead market, but you can see the other ones are still part of phase one. In April, we received a letter from 26 utilities. It was only utilities, but it was investor-owned public power as well as WAPA and an international entity that said they want to continue to phase two and continue to move forward. I will note over half of the signers on that letter are not included in the phase one participants. The dark bolded utilities are the ones that signed the letter on the 26th. Again, that was initiated by them, not SPP, but this is who signed it. So actually, when you move forward to phase one, this number could grow. Carrie, anything you want to add about the entities?
Oh, I was just going to clarify. You mentioned federal entity WAPA. Just to clarify, it was Bonneville.
Bonneville, sorry. WAPA is joining the RTO. Get them confused sometimes. Next will be the pathway to tariff approval, which we talked about earlier. Go next slide. Sure.
Yeah, so this was, and Paul hit on some of this earlier, but just the process. So we had 86 votes prior to the April the February impact. So we started in April with this governance and then held over 86 votes, large consensus. And so that's using the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 weighting. And then it went through our process, was approved unanimously by the IMIP, and then ultimately by the board. And so we followed the governance as much as we could, even though it was really something created and a model that we had drafted but had not been filed at FERC yet. But I think it was largely successful. You can see some of the no votes and the abstentions. Some of the no votes were, and I'll paraphrase my recollection of the no votes, was some of it was the speed at which things took place. And then also some concerns that they wanted the non-pricing state policy to be incorporated into the tariff prior to our initial filing of the tariff. But that work's going on now, as Kim talked about. And so, but overall, a large consensus that then led to the tariff filing. So where do we go next is phase 2. So phase 2 is the actual, if you go to the next slide, to 24. Phase 2 is how, so we've been designing the house, drafting all the plans for it. We ultimately need FERC approval, and then we can move forward with building the house. So that's what phase 2 is all about, is building the systems and also integrating the market participants into our systems in order to participate directly. And so throughout this part of 2024 and next quarter, we're working on negotiations of phase 2, what that looks like. We've announced that phase 2 costs $140 million plus financing costs. So we've been estimating about $150 million. That's to stand this up and implement the process. And then we will also end up filing at FERC again related to how that financing takes place. That's something Paul can speak to probably better than me. And then ultimately, once we get FERC approval of the tariff and then the financing terms and a critical mass of customers to move forward, then phase 2 will launch, and we will start building the house with an anticipated go live date of Markets Plus in Q2 of 2027. Anything you want to add to that?
No.
Okay. The next slide is just more details. So we anticipate the funding agreement is under draft right now, but what we've been communicating is that the share of the $150 million will be allocated based on load ratio share, but also an allocation if there's a participating generators or power marketers that they may that they can pay to also be part of the implementation. One question we often get is what's an exit fee for Markets Plus? And really the exit fee would be based on if an entity signed the phase 2 agreement, was in the market, and then exited, it would be just their share of any remaining debt that SPP had associated with the launch of Markets Plus. But after that, there's no cost to exit.
I'll try to give you like an example of how the math works. How we're funding this is how we've done all of our contract services. Entities agree for SPP to provide this. We may or may not have to go into debt to provide it. And so obviously somebody has to be on, we're a nonprofit. Somebody's got to be there to pay those costs. So I'll just make the math simple. Let's say it was $100 million and Carrie Simpson was 10 million of it. And let's just say hypothetically, we were amortizing that debt over 5 years. So then she'd be paying 2 million a year. And then at year 6, that cost would be off the charge that we would have. Let's say 3 years into it, she decided to leave, then she would have like a $4 million exit fee. So that's how the process would work. Details are still being worked out, We've done this approach with all contract services we've done over 20 years, and it's never been an issue.
And then the annual administration, so just the ongoing cost of running the market, we've estimated to be $70 to $75 million. And so if you're an entity that's 10% of the load, for example, you may have, depending on whether it's a 5-year amortization or 10-year, the 150 million might come in at something like $1 to $2 million a year. And on top of that, you'd be paying 10% of the 70 to 75 million. So your cost of participation would be in the $9 to $10 million range. We don't have numbers at this time set up for like whether El Paso or PNM or any other entity would participate here in New Mexico, but happy to do that if interested. And I believe that was the last slide. I guess I would just say, so right now, we are in what we're calling the post-phase 1 stage. So we're at FERC with our filing. Reply comments are coming in almost daily now. So we're following that closely. And then all those working groups we showed you earlier, those are still in place right now. And we're drafting protocols. So it's all the details, the more technical rules about participation in Markets Plus that's going on right now. We expect that to occur through the end of the year. And then eventually there will be a stage where entities sign on for phase 2, and then we'll want to change probably their tariffs at FERC in order to effectuate their participation. Anything else?
That's it.
That's it.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation and for coming. And also for making yourselves available to answer my questions. So that probably a reason why I really won't have many questions at this point. But just to make others aware, my questions were with respect to market power, and then how transmission is made available into the market, including through RAP, and SPP answered my questions and was very, willing to sit down and talk to me. So I really appreciate that. I am going to turn it over to see if Chairman or Commissioner Ellison has a question.
This is a curiosity question, but where will administration of this market be located?
Yeah, so right now it will be, I guess, in Little Rock. We are exploring offices in the West related to services we're offering.
Including New Mexico?
I'm sure everything's an option.
I wanted to follow up on your slide with the list of entities. What does the bolded font,
They signed the letter on that's about 3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah, and I just noticed, so the bold is parties that participate. It sent us a letter a few weeks ago. There were 26 entities that sent us a letter, and it was if you're thinking of like a Venn diagram, it was a subset of these entities, and then a bunch of other entities, a bunch of utilities in the West that have not been directly participating in Markets Plus as a formal stakeholder. And I just noticed there's one party bolded that I want to make sure to clarify. So it says Northwestern Energy Coalition, but it's really Northwestern Energy. And Northwestern Energy signed the letter, but they're not a part of phase 1. I think that was just a clerical error on the slide. Okay, but I want to make sure I clarify that.
Okay. But everyone on this list, they have committed to phase 1, is that?
Yes,
Yeah.
so everyone on this list is either a funding party of phase 1, and so contributed financially to the $9.7 million for us to do this tariff development. And is also part of this protocol process we're going through and are continuing to fund as we're at FERC.
Another subset of this list are parties who were not funding parties, but they were, we call them stakeholder agreement parties. They might have, like a good example is the Energy Authority. So they're a power marketing agency. And they wanted to participate in the voting process. And so under our rules, they're not a load serving entity. They're not public power. They're not an IOU. And so they were considered an independent, and they paid a fee to participate as a stakeholder. And so all of these entities had voting and have voting privileges in the stakeholder process right now, except for those that are in red, who decided not to move forward after we filed the tariff.
I see. So it's a list of funding parties. Not all of these are load serving entities, but the ones that are they committed to?
So they're right now, the only commitment we've asked for so far is just the phase one process. For moving forward into phase two, there's going to be another commitment date, and that has not occurred yet. That's what we're negotiating, the phase two agreement. And so we've had part like Bonneville Power Administration has come out and said they're leaning towards Markets Plus, but they haven't made the final determination. And so that process is ongoing right now. And we are expecting, based on all the timelines right now, that we'd be asking for commitments later this year for parties to move forward.
And that phase two would be the more binding phase. They're committed to funding and exploring, essentially.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And in terms of the fees, you mentioned it would be assessed for each transaction. Would that be an energy charge?
Yeah, so it's for the administrative costs, it's all generation, all load cleared by the market, all interchange cleared by the market would get allocated a rate or allocated a charge for the cost of our administration of the
Megawatt hour charge.
megawatt hour.
Okay. And I guess I'll ask the same question that I asked of the EDAM market, taking that scenario of, I'm not sure if this applies as well, but if you have an owner of wind power in New Mexico, and the BA, in this case PNM, were to join Markets Plus, how would that impact their transmission of power to their customers in California?
Sure. So the transmission service providers who sold that power are still ultimately the entity tariff that controls. From a Markets Plus perspective, they could participate. I think the question before was about pseudo tie versus dynamic schedule. So both of those functions can continue to occur. It would really be how that customer arranges the transaction and the facilitation of that transfer with their VA, and Markets Plus is downstream from that. So we would be optimizing based on what PNM, for example, if it was their transmission system that was being used to transfer that power to California, they would be communicating what's available to Markets Plus versus what is moving, like if we was an interchange for a dynamic schedule versus what's moving to California on that, and we would respect all of that.
Thank you.
Okay, and then just similar to what I was inquiring or commenting about with CAISO, I think both markets are similar in that with respect to how some of the transmission rights will be made available are going to likely rely on the OATs that the transmission providers file. And from my perspective, I could see that being unwieldy, like, how am I gonna follow all of those? And so I think that, there are some seams issues there that could be, I guess, made easier to solve. If there's like a pro forma tariff or something that is being created. And one of the other things that Mark mentioned earlier was the idea of reciprocity. So I'll be curious to see how that works out. I'm sure we'll be able to find a solution to those seams issues. And so anyway, just a general comment that I think it'd be better to have a venue to have that conversation and try to create common rules. I think that would also make it easier for any participant who's coming in, doesn't need to try to figure out what rules are different between transmission providers or BAs in any given market. Does staff in here have any questions that they would like to ask? No. Okay. And then staff online, do you have any questions? I don't see any. And then I'll go to the room here first to see if anybody else has any questions. No, it's crystal clear. Okay. And then and then I do see there's like a hand raised or a comment. Patrick, can you check on that?
Commissioner, I don't see a hand raised, but if there is someone with a question, go ahead and ask that.
Okay, maybe there's just something in the chat. Okay,
No,
well,
the chat is clear, Commissioner.
If you have any questions, now's your time, but we also have, I guess, any questions directed at SPP, now is your time, but we also have another Q&A session. And we'll see if we have any questions for that. Okay, it sounds like we don't have any other questions. Again, thank you so much for coming. I'll open up this general Q&A part on the agenda for now. So anybody who has questions, please raise your hand online or physically in person. We might hear crickets, and that's okay. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any questions. And so I'll move on to the next part on the agenda, which is closing remarks. So I think that, oh, we do have a question. Okay.
Yeah.
Vijay, please go ahead.
Thank you. Vijay Sittal, WRA with Sydney Welter. I first want to just thank the commissioners and the PRC staff for these valuable presentations by both the market operators, which is very valuable. This is partly a question and partly a comment. So I'll start with the comment part, is that I think both the market operators, SPP and CalISO staff have worked very diligently. And so at WRA wanted to just clarify our position since it was presented in the SPP slides on our filing with our PIO community of partners, a protest filing, which is not to criticize or prevent Markets Plus product. It is to seek improvements, and we try to make our case there. I just want to really make that known, because sometimes what we see in the first 3 pages may not be what is in the full filing. So I just wanted to go on the record to clarify that is our desire for improvements, and have been working with SPP staff and where we can attend the processes. The same goes with CalISO, is with the multiple stakeholder processes. It's hard for limited staff entities to engage everywhere. As Commissioner Aguilera, you highlighted the same thing with so many efforts going on, how to keep up. So that's my comment. And my question is, with due respect to the commissioners, is how you wish to take feedback from these two presentations and how we can give constructive opinion. We were hoping to provide some filing into the docket in the next month or so that suggests some considerations to be kept in mind, but would love to really know what the commission is thinking in terms of big picture or road mapping, but I understand if you don't have a perspective or consensus on that yet. But those are my two remarks. Thank you. And Vijay Satyal with WRA Regional Markets and Transmission.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that question was for us.
Yes, actually it was, if you don't mind. Yes.
Yeah, so that was going to be part of my closing remarks is, you know, and I did mention earlier as well, I think that it would be helpful to the extent that you have like comments about or draft about what the commission should consider with respect to a guidance document. I think that you could file that in the record. I would find that helpful. If you were referencing comments on these presentations that were given today, I wasn't necessarily, you know, envisioning that, but you're definitely free to file comments on that as well. Though I don't know that anybody would respond. I would find it helpful if WRA or any other party has ideas as to what the guidance document should look like. And we do have good information in the record as well from a previous bench request that we had issued that generated a lot of responses. So.
Yeah, I would just point out the meeting notice for today's meeting gives you a case number and it also gives you an email address. So if you're looking for the logistics of how to do that.
Yeah, and so that's a good point. And I do want to highlight though, I do think it would be good to upload this into the record, so into this docket number. And that way, you know, everybody could see the guidance, if any, that is being proposed. So, you know, that was going to be part of my closing remarks here. I think the other thing that I will say is, you know, and Vijay said some of this already, is that there has been a lot of work that has been put into regional markets lately. It's keeping a lot of people busy, but I think definitely worthwhile because ratepayers have some value to gain from these markets, I think. And so, you know, for me, it's important to have this conversation, you know, to see what the utilities that are regulated here in New Mexico are thinking, and also so they know what we're thinking and what stakeholders are thinking. You know, I also think that it's good to have options. You know, when I think about this idea of having different options, I think about the Eastern Interconnection, where we have 5 RTOs and ISOs, and I think that that works. That being said, you know, there's the Pathways Initiative that we didn't really discuss today. It could be an option to, you know, have Pathways come present at a future meeting. We also discussed at our regular open meeting yesterday, potentially having RAP come present. So I think those are options in terms of next steps. The other next step that I really do want to talk about is the results to the study that PNM and EPE have ongoing. As I mentioned earlier, I think that the connectivity is really going to be a big factor in any decision that the utilities make. And so, I'm thinking that we could have that in that workshop in August. And hopefully that's enough time for the consultants to do what they do. Commissioners, do you have any closing remarks?
I'll just echo something you'd said earlier that, I've been through these type of presentations before. Every time find something new that you take away from it, and then reemphasize what I started with. This is a big topic across the West. New Mexico is an important player. So appreciate you helping us with that by coming here and being here today. So thank you.
I would agree with your remarks, Commissioner Aguilera, that the transmission capacities are very important in any decision here. The market design is important, but you've got to have the capacity for the regional exchanges to happen in order for the market to be valuable. So I appreciate your initiative in organizing that and asking those questions and organizing that workshop in August. I do also think that New Mexico is in somewhat a unique position in that we do have these merchant transmission lines being planned and being built that are primarily designed to take New Mexico wind to California. And I think that, unless regional markets and transfer capabilities are considered, that these lines may not be available for regional market exchanges. And I think that would be a lost opportunity. I think that clearly ratepayers do benefit from enhanced participation in regional markets. We know California has negative pricing during the day, during the warmer months, and ratepayers benefit from being able to import that power. So I do think that consideration should be given to the ability of these merchant lines to allow for that regional market participation.
I think those are very good points. And hopefully this study does analyze that. I recognize that there will be parts of the transfer capability that just cannot be known because you don't know, who's in what market. You don't know the details about how transmission rights will be able to be used necessarily from those individual oats. But I think it's still important to make educated assumptions and look at that information to see how things might result. And so thank you both also for mentioning, the role that New Mexico plays in this. I absolutely agree. I think we are, we have a lot to offer. I guess I'll quote Kelsey, who was here the last time and said that we're small but mighty. So I agree with that. So I think we, unless there are any other comments from you, I think we can adjourn. All right, well, thank you. Thank you again.